there's a 1% surcharge.
You are now live.
Okay, we're live. If I got it here, it's not gonna register up there, right? That did, okay. All right, we got our notice sign off. This is Senate Finance. This is Thursday, the 7th. Call this meeting to order. Okay, we're live on TV, Sandra, so I won't say anything about the pink suit. All right. That's Wednesdays. So today, and we are running behind, we have moved the annuities 101 to 230. But there's been some discussion. I was looking at 437 for possible place to put it. But there's been discussion about the fact that Vermont has the highest vacancy rate, unoccupied dwelling rate of any state in the nation. At the same time, we are looking at a housing crisis. And so there's been some work going on trying to figure out a way we might look at that and perhaps raise some money to help build some housing. We've done a lot for affordable, but we're starting to hear that middle housing for, you know, nurses, firefighters, policemen, your general working people is missing, and that the average house costs $350,000 to build, and the average working family can afford $200,000 to $250,000. So we got a gap, and I've got, you all should have on your desk, if I remember my lessons, the page 437, and this is an amendment I know Senator Pearson and Senator McDonald have been working on. We've talked with leadership about it, and we thought I don't think this is thought of as a final product, but as a possible way to deal with the issue and something we might be able to do some work on. So Senator Pearson, you want to walk us through this?
Sure, be glad to, and thank you, Madam Chair. It only has my name because I went to see Abby, but Senator McDonald and I have been trying to figure this out for a few weeks here. As you said, we do have, according to analysis, the highest rate of empty homes in the country, tied, I think, with Maine. About 23% of our homes would be considered unoccupied. At the same time, we're spending tens of millions of dollars every year to build housing. These higher end second homes that got gobbled up quickly and above asking price actually add pressure and cost to those of us already living permanently here by pushing up property values, so our property taxes go up, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of impact. So the question is there a way to fairly simply create some kind of a vacancy impact charge? And that's what we're contemplating here today. I think our goal, and Senator McDonald, I'll ask you to jump in any time, but was to, go after unoccupied homes, the high-end unoccupied homes. We're not looking to impact camps, seasonal homes. We're not looking to, go impact landlords. We're really looking at those homes that once housed people could again house people as their residents and are sitting there most of the year unoccupied. So trying to build on structures we already have, what we've done is created this charge, immediately removed everybody that's a homestead, obviously, and then tried to figure out how to handle some of the other curiosities. So basically, we peg this as we do with, in order to have a homestead, you have to live in your house over 6 months a year. So that's the trigger to be considered a vacant home, excuse me. A vacant home under this would be any home that is not occupied for at least half of the year. You're excluded if your building is rented, and in this manner, helpfully, we already recently required that any landlord fill in what we used to call a renter's rebate. Right now, that is mandated for every landlord. So that removes all of those standard rental properties. And then you're left with a universe of what we are getting closer to the vacant homes that we're after. And we decided to recognize there's a difference between, say, a deer camp or a summer camp that's been in the family for a long time and frankly could never be occupied year round, could never fit the bill of actually providing housing. And the best way that was recommended to us and what is drafted here is a cutoff of appraised value of $400,000. Anything below that, boom, you're not considered a vacant property under this charge setup. And then finally, we imagine creating a process where the owner of one of these buildings would be alerted that they are likely to be assessed this charge and given a way of checkbox. No, turns out my son lives there, and so it's not my domicile, but somebody is living in it over half the year. We would, if we take this up, we would have to get clear on some of the stranger details like Airbnb that's rented a lot of the year, 10 months a year, but not occupied by one person. I think we would have to figure out, make sure we're treating those buildings deliberately. But that's the concept. And I think what we've tried to do is build it on the structures that we already use, that the tax department is already after. And then what this calls for is a 1% surcharge on their property tax. That would show up on the bill, administered just the way we do the property tax. And because this vacancy impact has some impact more locally, the draft here contemplates that a municipality could also assess their own charge similarly. So I think that's the concept. Senator McDonald, what part did I get wrong? What did I miss?
Well, we got a few things out there that we haven't got the details to nail it down, but the principle was to react to the census that said that we were the state that had the most unoccupied homes of the 50, and the other survey was showed the top 10 states in the union for empty homes, and half of them were the southern Gulf states, and the other half were for poverty reasons, that the houses were empty and unused, and the other half were vacation states, Maine, I think New Hampshire, Vermont, and two others.
Okay. Senator Gray.
Do you have is there a fiscal note on this? I don't mean to jump the gun. Okay. Concept of what it might raise?
Yeah. It's hard because we haven't yet had the chance to ask tax about it, but Graham, and he's here, but his crude estimate is in the neighborhood of 30 million.
Okay. So, can you speak again a little bit about the connection between non-vacant homes, so I think most people are, it sounds like people are saying it almost this way, vacation homes, right? Second homes, unoccupied homes. And the impact on the Vermont housing situation for Vermonters who are here like full-time residents. I'm trying to figure out why those vacation homes have a negative impact on homes for full-time residents. I feel like I'm missing the nexus.
Okay, so why that's,
Well,
Yeah.
so I mean, I could turn it around. I'm not trying to be contrary. I could say how lucky Vermont is to have such a high percentage of people who have such a low demand on our services and they're contributing to our taxes. So I don't, like that's a different way of looking at the same situation, but so that's why it feels a little like a penalty for having your vacation home here. And that could be just where you want to go, but I'm not sure how I can connect the two in my head about, well, why is that population having a negative impact on folks who are, we know, having trouble finding homes, period, who live here.
One of the things that we talked about is that when people build in Vermont, the builders brush off the notion of building homes for working folks. They're not about to waste their time when they can build vacation homes for folks who are wealthy people. And then with a full knowledge that when they're building them, they're going to be empty for half the year or more. And we're spending a lot of public dollars to incent the construction of homes for working families that can't find residences. But that's from the borrowed money from the feds. That's from our revenues.
Yeah.
And this would be a companion piece that collects money from those who would divert our builders to building homes that are going to be unoccupied most or half the time.
Senator, we have no testimony that says the builders are diverted. I just put builders on the list.
We're discussing
Okay,
what we believe to be true. It is in this state.
you believe to be true. I'm not sure I believe it,
That's
so
what-
let's be accurate.
I think that Senator Ray was asking, why were we doing this? What do the problem we think it's solving? I would also say that if you look at a model of building, the builders open up the door in the morning and they welcome everybody who wants to have a house built, and then they ask them to line up with who has the most money getting ahead of the line. So
I thought this was a way to raise some money, not if we wanted to free up housing that was vacant, that could be occupied by Vermonters. We'd flip it and be charging a surcharge to those below 400,000. Most Vermonters can't afford $1 million, but my understanding was this was a way to raise money.
Yep.
Okay, other than that, assessing blame theory, anything else, it's, okay?
And to collect it from the houses that have the money
That
that we built
is
for.
my understanding. Senator Pearson, and then I saw Senator Hardy and Senator Brock.
Yeah, I think we've heard from Senator Sorokin. It's too bad he can't be with us. Maybe Senator Brock would agree that, part of this missing middle housing does have to do with the fact that builders are for whatever reason that doesn't pencil out for those starter homes. So we did hear that as informed other bills, but the simple answer, I guess, is these are homes that could be occupied by Vermonters, and we're spending tens of millions of dollars of public funds to build homes because we have a very low vacancy rate, and so there is an impact. The other impact is in our, maybe particularly in our rural areas, when homes are quickly gobbled up at above asking price, that does tend to elevate the whole groundless in those areas, and therefore puts tax pressure. Property tax bills go up. So to my mind, there's those two impacts that are quite are linked. And then there is, I think, a very reasonable debate about, well, what would you do with this money? Do you put it into the ed fund and lower the existing property taxes for homeowners? Do you put the money into VHFA and have a reliable source of income for missing middle housing? I mean, these are good questions that we will have to get to, but to me, that's the connection of the impact. And there are municipalities around the country, and notably in Vancouver, not in our country, but also housing, a jurisdiction with tough housing situations that are in the process or have been doing this. Other states have not done it, but of course, no other state has a statewide property tax. So in a sense, we have the infrastructure to look at that uniquely. And it's one of the reasons why this proposal came together relatively quickly.
Okay, it's Senator Hardy, that's Senator Brock, then Senator Bray.
I had a question and then a comment. So, Senator Pearson, how much is the charge? I'm missing that, or I know Graham is going to go over it, or I hope Graham's going to go over it.
And Abby was awesome at helping draft it. It's a 1% surcharge. And
a 1% surcharge when they pay their property taxes, essentially?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So I think, this is anecdotally, I will say that up front, but there are a lot of towns in my district that have a really high percentage of homes that are either second homes or vacant homes. I mean, you walk down the main street of my little town, East Middlebury, and I can count, vacant home, vacant home, vacant home, vacant home. This person's here like 5 weekends a year. This person's never here. There are some homes I have no idea who lives there because they're always vacant. And this is on the main street of a tiny little town. And I think that that's more and more true across our state. And I know this anecdotally, but obviously the data is playing out that is true. And while there may not be a cost for services in the same direct way, there's actually is a cost by not having people being able to live in these homes that send their kids to our school, that volunteer in our fire departments, that, you know, our Vermont is built on people like stepping up and helping make everything work in our communities. And the more vacant homes, the fewer people there are to do these things. And as Senator Pearson said, it drives up the cost of housing for everyone else, because people are bidding from out of state without seeing the houses, sight unseen, overbidding the price of the house and driving up the cost for people who are here. And I've heard from many, many constituents that have had that happen to them. And so I think that while maybe I think that if we are looking for revenue sources for the long term, this is a fair and appropriate revenue source for the long term. And I think it's a great idea.
Okay. I think if this is a property tax or surcharge on your property tax, it is going into the ed fund. It would lower property taxes on existing homes. I'm not clear how it would provide additional housing. I thought originally, if we did it as a surcharge, X amount, I thought it was going into VHCB to build middle homes.
What you have before us, either of those approaches could be used depending on what we thought was.
All right, but lowering property taxes will not build homes.
You'd have to notwithstand and direct it somewhere
Yes.
else.
Yeah.
Yes, or do it as a surcharge, not as a tax. Okay, I've got Senator Brock and then Senator Gray.
That's part of this discussion.
Yes,
Surcharge or an increased amount of tax is
yes,
the same thing.
yes, it would.
And so from that standpoint, I just wonder if this kind of overshoots the mark initially, because the question is, why do we have such a high vacancy rate in the first place? And we made in this, I think, some assumptions as to why, but without necessarily any data to back that up. The assumption may be that the high number of vacation homes, for example. Do we want to discourage the vacation home market and the second home market because of the amount of revenue that second homeowners bring to Vermont on a consistent and on an annual basis? And is the so-called or presumed increase in the number of occupied properties that would result, is that based on a 1% tax? Is there any meaningful data that suggests anywhere in the world that that has in fact happened or is a likely result? Among the questions, of course, about the vacancy rate being high here, again, asking that question, why, is critical. And maybe one of the reasons why and why we have such high costs is because we have such high administrative costs associated with building. Some would argue that we almost discourage the building of lower income homes because the cost of building them when it comes to permitting and other kinds of factors is almost as high for a small home as it is for a large home. And so therefore we create an economic environment for a builder in which it is not economical to build a smaller home because that administrative overhead between lawyers and engineers and permit writers and so on, and time is such an adverse factor. And that's what I mean about a study as to what are the elements of cost that go into these things and how much are we expending in that latter area. I think it's something that is well worth looking at. I'm not sure at a time in which we have surplus revenue and huge amounts of federal funds, the notion of simply increasing taxes now just strikes me as something that is almost, I think we've got to get laughed out of the room. Just in terms of the wisdom of doing a tax increase that apparently applies to a lot of homes without any information as to what kinds of homes and how many of these homes and what the effect of that will be. Now, maybe Graham will be able to tell us that, but based on, I've not found JFO to be particularly helpful in providing data and information that they may not have. And I'm still, if the notion here is to increase the inventory of property, I'm not at all sure how this would do that.
I think that's a question. I also know that local planning and zoning adds a great deal to the cost. I've been on the planning commission in this town. We like cement sidewalks, we like granite curbing, we like underground utilities. And I wish Senator Sirotkin were here because I think this is a way to raise money, but how to get the money to achieve the goals is out there. It is hard. We can take a field trip 2 blocks down to the place where the city's neighbors won't let you build housing that by any smart growth standard should be full of moderately priced housing. We might need to broaden this a little if we're gonna make it work.
Well, smart growth often becomes an oxymoron.
Well, yes. Senator Bray.
So, yeah, I think I still am having a little trouble seeing a real connection between vacation homes and finding more homes for Vermonters. I mean, to Senator McDonald's point about builders being attracted to building larger, more expensive homes, that's capitalism So that's, I don't know that we're doing a planned economy. So, and I don't know if the data around people coming and buying homes, I mean, are they COVID refugees? I mean, that's the term we've heard about people. Some people are moving into villages, towns, et cetera. And yes, because they come from someplace where property values are higher, they come with cash on hand and it's affordable. But I don't know that the percentage of people who have moved here, how many are sticking versus are creating, quote unquote, vacation homes that are unoccupied for part of the year. And as to the notion that not being a full-time resident somehow, is detrimental to the neighborhood. I mean, it's true, we have very high rates of volunteering and stuff like that, but I don't know that that can be that's a community building and connections piece. But this is a tax committee, so I'm really struggling to see that in essence, we're contemplating a punitive tax, I would call it, because you don't happen to live here. It's like for a long time, we had people, we called them snowbirds. We never said, oh, all those damn snowbirds, they're leaving their homes vacant while they're in Florida. I've never heard that once.
They're not cluttering our highways and our schools.
Right, so it's, anyway, it's odd, I just don't see the data to make the connection yet, but I'm certainly interested in learning more.
Okay, well, it's being proposed and it's out there. I think it's still in formative stages. And we're gonna keep, we can keep working on it. And part of this is just to bring up the questions that we may need to find. So Senator Pearson, and then our next group.
I would just say to Senator Bray, that COVID refugees are occupying their homes if they're moving here, so not part of this discussion. You said for years we've recognized snowbirds and not noticed or referenced their homes being vacant. In most cases, somebody who has a ski condo, that's unlikely, I think, to be valued at over $400,000 in an assessment, not what they could sell it for, but in the local assessment. But also, for years, we really didn't notice that we were getting tighter and tighter housing markets and perennially, not keeping up with the housing shortage. So now we're forced to spend, what is it? It's I think we've topped $100 million to pay for housing in the last couple of years. I mean, maybe everybody's okay with that. I think that's an unfortunate need for tax dollars. The free market has not handled this, and so to the extent that we must make investments to deal with housing, it seems appropriate to me to ask those who are vacationing here, who have high-end properties, to help us meet that one way or another, and that's I think what this is about.
Can I say one clarification? So by snowbird, I'm referring to Vermonters. They're usually Vermont residents who go south for the winter, not people coming up here to ski.
Well, sure. If they are domiciled in Vermont, they're not part of this. I mean, I don't, if they have a home here but are domiciled in Florida because they're not living here for over 6 months, I do think if they are in a high-end property, we should talk about that. But as soon as you are resident of Vermont by virtue of declaring Vermont your official resident, your homestead, you're not part of this, and that's very deliberate. That's why we're looking at it this way.
Okay. I'm getting a list of people we do need to talk to. We'll talk to Graham, but VACB, we need to talk about, do we just want to, is this middle income housing? Because that's where the crunch seems to be, and that's where people are getting outbid. Most of that is not the over 400,000. I'm gonna ask Property Valuation and Review to come in and talk to us about that number. Because I think we might be picking up more homes than we do, and we're talking 1 day difference here, the 182 days. We might find that some people do decide to stay in Florida where they don't have any taxes. And maybe that would free up housing, but not many Vermonters can afford a $500,000 house. So I'm not sure, but I'm gonna have BHCB, I'll get the realtors, property valuation. I'd like to talk to the builders about, and we'll see if we can find some developers about what are the roadblocks to building housing in Vermont. And
Well, housing's being built.
yeah, okay, what is the hot roadblock to building? And other than Chittenden County, where is housing being built?
Where is it being built?
I'm not seeing much of it around here.
You go,
It's Chittenden County spreading.
right, South Burlington,
Yeah,
Williston,
Chittenden
they're
County.
huge.
And it's spreading up to Franklin, up towards St. Albans, and it's just picking up the corner of Waterbury in Washington County. But it's the commuting distance to Chittenden because that's where our jobs are.
Franklin is a commuter,
Yes,
commuter growth.
yes, and I bet you parts of Addison are.
Stowe is house people who have enough money
Be
to go.
careful, Stowe is now mine.
I know, it's a town where, remember when Act 60 passed and Stowe was gonna dry up and blow away? And now, oh, that was the goose that was gonna, break the, kill the goose that laid the golden egg, and lo and behold, that is they build a lot of houses up there that they call the dark houses, because the lights are never on. And now, Chair, we need perhaps someone to talk to us about what's going on nationally, where we have more and more families in the United States that rent, and that's increasing. And then you have other
Okay.
families who collect homes, some of which they rent, but who have several homes. And that's a change in our
Okay.
demographics, and it is happening faster in Vermont than it is in many other
Okay,
places.
see if you can find out who we would get to do that. So we will keep going through. Anybody who has anybody they'd like to hear from, let me know. And we'll see if we can find us, we have a problem with building mid-level homes. And money would help, but we may have some other things. I was hoping Senator Sirotkin was here because his designated neighborhoods might, whatever we're calling them, but they're now in the,
Sorokin's neighborhood.
yeah, Sirotkin's neighborhoods. I think they started with Jim Douglas, but that may be an area that we want to look at and maybe help them grow. But
For instance, priority housing projects developed in a designated area, like an NDA.
yeah, something like
They
that.
get an Act 250 exemption, so
Right.
that the sense that, Senator Brock's point, we're attempting, I don't know how effective it is in the end, to reduce, administrative overheads.
Well, I know that we are attempting to do it. I'm just not sure how well. The times that I've spent going around looking at housing projects that are supported by various 3- and 4-letter agencies. And this 400,000 is not so out of range. I mean, I remember looking at a project, I think it was in Bellows Falls, in which they were converting a building that had mostly one-bedroom units, some slightly larger units. And the average price of these units with the conversion that they were doing was at about $400,000. I mean, and it seems to be astounding for that, but, you know, this $400,000 number in here is not as out of line given inflation and what the price of housing is. And certainly when you're talking about newer housing, that's where you are. You're not necessarily talking about elegance.
We're dealing with, it costs $350,000 to build a starter home, and that's above what most working Vermonters can pay. This is a way to raise some money. Then you've got to figure out how you're going to get those projects developed, and the designated neighborhoods might get us around some of the local planning and zoning. I mean, I've sat there and watched a developer come in and bring his landscape architect plans and have the planning commission say, and I was on it, I consented, that we can charge you, so we're going to charge you for a landscape architect so that our architect can judge the quality of the work of your architect. And I mean, this was something like a gas station and a couple of cherry trees. I mean, but it all adds to the cost. And some of that, I think we might be able to find a way to.
If I may.
Yes.
So it actually was surprising how the estimates from the Natural Resources Board on if you were developing a priority housing project in a designated area and waive from Act 50, how much money you were saving by getting that waiver. And on state fees, Act 50 fees ranged, so these are $1 million plus projects, multi-million. They were saving $35,000 to $60,000. So I was surprised actually it was that little money. A lot of the builders we talked to said actually because Act 50 is it's the same program pretty much everywhere. They know how to deal with it. What cost them time and money more often was municipal permitting, because it was all over the map and they had to figure it out each time they went someplace.
So it's a more complex issue than just raising some money, but this is a way to raise some money. We'll work through it and see in the end if people think this is a good way or not. Let me know who you'd like to hear from. And we are going on to Annuities 101 because we went through the insurance bill last week, and the only thing, it was pretty much housekeeping. I think the last 30 pages were to just put us in line with the federal laws. Okay, Senator from Massachusetts, I'm losing it, but they went in after the crash in the early 2000s, and this was all the new banking and securities laws. Maria, what are we getting in?
You're exactly right about that. That had to do with the credit for reinsurance and the changes based on some international agreements with other jurisdictions. So that, yes, that was like the last substantive section of the bill.
Yeah.
Yep. And then I think you,
go ahead.
I think you had some questions about the minimum statutory interest rate that applies to annuities. That was the standard non-forfeiture law. You had asked, you had considered this last year, considered a proposal by industry of lowering the statutory minimum, but decided you wanted to hear more about the issues from the Department of Financial Regulations. You asked them to study the issue and come back with a recommendation, which they did. And I think they're here today to go over their findings.
I think there was a confusion or unclarity about when, where, and to whom that interest rate was paid, as opposed to the interest that was paid on the investment. It was when you cease to pay into the investment, what's the minimum interest rate? So we're gonna do annuities 101, and they tell us Mary Block is the person who can tell us about annuities and explain what this does, and then hopefully, and Kevin Gaffney is also with us, we'll be able to vote this bill out and get it on its way. To date, we haven't changed anything, I don't believe, unless the department asked us to. So, okay, so Mary, why don't you just, Kevin?
Yeah, just briefly, for the record, Kevin Gaffney, Deputy Commissioner of Insurance. And thank you for the time to allow me to just briefly introduce Mary. Just as a point of background, because I think the complexity of this product, which is not as complex as a lot of annuities, and our research actually provided a broader context of the annuity market. And Mary was the integral part of this project, and it was born out of the fact that the department identified the need some time ago now that these complex products need just greater expertise from a regulatory standpoint. So this position that Mary has filled for the last just about a year now, I think, is a new position to the insurance division. We repurposed an existing position with a greater focus on as a life specialist and life and annuity specialist. So Mary comes to us with a lot of experience, but I'm certainly going to be here to assist and answer any questions during the discussion.
Okay, Mary, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you. I have some slides to share if that works for everybody. Please.
I think that would be helpful.
Please feel free to interrupt me, ask me to clarify. I've been doing this for a long time, and so sometimes it comes very easy to me, and so slow me down if you need me to.
Okay.
All right, let me share this.
And just for the record, Mary, your name and title.
Oh, in a minute.
Oh. Yeah, no, once we get the screen shared, Mary, just give us your name for the record. That's so we have a name to go with the voice, but now we've got a face, so I don't know how this is all changing. But
All right, so
we'll stick to the old rules.
All right, so I am Mary Block. I'm a senior life insurance specialist with the Department of Financial Regulation. So can you see the screen is my first question. See the slides, I mean?
Yes.
Okay. For some reason, I can't seem to get the slideshow to start, so. All right, well, we'll go from here, I guess. So we wanted to do Annuities 101. So I'm starting with a very basic definition of what an annuity is. So an annuity is basically a contract between an insurance company and either an individual or a group. That individual or group makes contributions to that annuity, and the insurer promises later in time to pay an income. And that's an annuity at its very basic. Unfortunately, it's not that basic. There are lots of things to consider, lots of types of annuities to consider. So there are individual annuities that are contracts between the insurer and an individual or a joint contract holder. There are group annuities that we think about, which are contracts between an insuree and an entity like a retirement planner or an employer for employee benefits. There are immediate annuities, which are annuities that pay an income stream as soon as they're purchased. And then there are deferred annuities, which I think are the annuities that most of us think about from a retirement perspective, which are the ones that we contribute to over time. And then some point in the future, like at a retirement date, they convert to an income stream, either for a specific period or, possibly for the life of the contract holder. There are also a bunch of types of annuities that govern sort of how you earn in the annuity. So at the most conservative level, we have fixed annuities, and these are just annuities that pay a guaranteed rate of interest for a specified time period. Contributions to these annuities are generally guaranteed, so they are the most conservative and the safest. A variation on a fixed annuity is a fixed indexed annuity, which operates very similarly, but the returns instead of an interest rate are based on an index like the S&P 500. Generally, there's a minimum guaranteed rate, and the contributions, again, are generally guaranteed to be preserved. As we move up the risk scale, we get the variable annuities. These are both securities and insurance products, so they are governed both at the state level and by the Securities and Exchange Commission. They fluctuate based on the market, and they consist of choices of investments within the contract that the contract holder picks. The principal is not guaranteed generally, so they can lose money, they can make a lot of money, and there's a wide scale variation of risk depending on what's selected. Variable indexed annuities are another variation. These are, again, securities and insurance products, but they fluctuate based on returns of market indexes that have been selected by the consumer. They, again, don't generally guarantee the principal in the instrument. Finally, we have hybrid annuities, which are the most complicated. And these are annuities that are a combination of the other types of annuities. They can be, for example, a variable annuity that has investments to select from, but also has a fixed account that you can select from that gives you a fixed interest rate like a regular fixed annuity would. These are the most complicated, and they tend to be the most expensive.
Madam Chair, can I ask?
Okay, we have a question. Senator Surratt.
Thank you. So, real simple question. I hope we don't. Well, anyhow, what's the difference between a fixed annuity and a certificate of deposit?
So an annuity is an insurance product, and it gives you a guaranteed rate of interest. It's a guaranteed rate of interest and a guaranteed income stream once you convert that to income stream. A certificate of deposit just gives you that guaranteed interest rate for a certain period of time. You buy it, you get interest at X percentage for, say, 2 years, if it's a 2-year CD. When you're done, you get the money back, and that's it. A fixed annuity actually provides you with an income stream. So you buy it, you contribute to it over a period of time, potentially. And then when you convert it to an income stream, it then begins to pay you a payment every month or every year, depending on what you selected. It can pay you for a specified time period. So based on the value of that contract, it might pay you a higher annual income amount for 10 years, or you could have it go for your lifetime and it would pay, a actuarially lower income but for a longer period of time, depending on when that contract holder died. So it gives you that income stream as opposed to just giving you a lump sum at the end based on what that interest rate was for that fixed period.
So the difference is in an annuity, you can set the income stream to pay you back some of your principal, as with the CD, you just leave the whole principal in until the maturity date?
Yep. So when the income starts paying from a fixed annuity, for example, you would actually receive both principal and income as a part of those payments back.
Okay.
And some of them you can draw, they guarantee you a payment for life after, there's interest and there's time. Mm-hmm. But then even though that payment might exceed the principal of, at least if I'm understanding my financial advisor, once I turn it on, it's guaranteed for the rest of my life.
Yes.
There's a time frame in which I can't turn it on. And I have, and I can keep paying in, but it's when what I've paid in and what it's earned is gone, I still get the annuity. So there's that. Some people get more than they put in, and some people may make less.
Right. So that's the risk the insurance company has to calculate for. So if somebody selects income for life, it could, die the next year, and that ends, and the annuity stops paying. They could live until they're 120 and keep paying. That's part of the risk of the insurance.
All right, Mary, we're having some trouble hearing you, so we're gonna. Do you know how to turn up?
I can try on this side, but it might be your end too if you're far away from your computer. I'm just having a really hard time hearing you, and there's a lot of rustling in the room.
It's a little
And I also
It's
wonder
the rustling.
if your
Someone's not on mute.
slides are on our website, that would be helpful so I could see them on my computer. I don't know if you've sent them to Faith.
No, I didn't send them to Faith, actually.
Okay, maybe when we're finished, if you send them to Faith, then
I can do that, yeah.
go back.
Is that better? Can you talk so I can see if that volume is better?
I'm right here. How's that?
That's much better.
Okay.
Good.
All right, and I'll try to talk a little louder just to make sure. My mother would have been shocked to hear I needed to talk louder, but
We're getting used to talking through masks, so.
yes, that is definitely a problem. All right, so any more questions or would you like me to move on?
I'm not seeing any questions, so let's
Let's
keep,
keep going.
yeah.
All right, so just some important terms with respect to annuities that come up in conversation. The principal is the amount of money that's contributed to the annuity. The accumulation period is that period we talked about where contributions are made before any income starts being received. The payout period is the period when that income starts being received and you stop accumulating value in the annuity. And most annuities have surrender charges. So these are fees that are charged when a contract holder takes money out of the annuity prior to the end of the intended accumulation period. Annuities are supposed to be long-term investments. And so these are sort of a disincentive to pull money out early. And they're also a form of protection for the insurance company, because obviously they do their calculations based on when they think that annuity is going to be held for and so forth. And so these are designed to deal with those types of issues. There's a surrender period, which is the period of time during which that surrender charge would apply. Generally speaking, those charges decline over time. And once you get to the period where actuarially everybody assumed the contract would be held till, those surrender charges go away. Some more terms are the credited rate, which is the rate, that's that interest rate that the insurance company says they're going to pay you in a fixed annuity. That's how you're earning. And it's paid to you for the life of the contract. It's also used in the calculation of the surrender value, which we'll talk about in a minute, but that's that value you get if you decide to cash the annuity in early as opposed to converting it to the income stream. The non-forfeiture rate, which is why we're all here, is the rate that's used to determine with an individual deferred fixed annuity, the minimum value that someone could get for their surrender if they surrender early. So again, that surrender value is the cash value of the annuity at the time if you pull it out early, and it's calculated depending on a number of factors on either the credited rate or the non-forfeiture rate. And then there are riders, what are referred to as riders, which are additional features that can be added to an annuity contract. There's a fee, obviously, to do it, but these features allow a contract holder to sort of tailor the annuity to what they want. And they can be all kinds of things like a guaranteed minimum income rate or a guaranteed withdrawal benefit, enhanced rates of returns, step-ups or increases in death value and principal value and so forth. And they allow a consumer to sort of create an annuity that's the best for them. So some other things to think about with annuities. As I mentioned, they're primarily retirement vehicles and they're intended for long-term investments. As a result, they're generally illiquid. So there's penalties for taking things out earlier than they were intended to be held. And those fees can be significant very early. And like I said, they decline over time. Annuities are tax deferred growth. And so like IRA accounts, they're subject to tax penalties if withdrawals are taken out prior to 59 and a half. So they're intended to be sort of a retirement vehicle. And if you keep them until you're 60, no penalty from the IRS. As I mentioned, there's a number of fees and charges. There's administrative fees and annual fees, and then extra fees if you decide to add on extra features. Generally, those fees increase as the complexity of the product increases and the risk increases. So individual deferred fixed and fixed indexed annuities, that's a mouthful, are the only types of annuities that the statutory minimum non-forfeiture interest rate applies to. So it's a smaller universe, and it's those more conservative annuity products. As I mentioned before, during accumulation, the contract holder for these would be making one or more tax deferred contributions, and then they're earning interest. It's either that fixed rate or the rate based on the index link. And then at some point, they convert that at distribution into that series of income payments. And it can be one payment if you take a lump sum, or it can be a series of payments for a particular time period. Oftentimes it's a 10-year or a 20-year period, certain time, or it can be for the life of the contract holder. There's obviously give and take on all of those. If you decide to only go 10 years, you'll get a higher payment, but you know you're not going to get it after a certain period. But if you die during that 10 years, beneficiaries continue to get those payments. If you go for payments for life and you die the next year, nobody gets any more payments. So there's things to consider as you make the decision about how you want to take that income. So when consumers decide to buy an annuity, they're thinking about which insurer do I trust, or what can they offer me? What's that credited rate? How long do I want to hold this for? And what are those other contract features? And they sort of take all of that into account to decide which annuity is best for their needs. So somebody asked me about certificates of deposit. We'll talk a little bit here about, so what are the other options? And there are pros and cons to all, but these are sort of the most conservative things in the marketplace that you might buy instead of a fixed annuity. Obviously, fixed annuities give you that guaranteed interest, the principal protection, the tax deferred growth, and so forth. They have lower income opportunities because they are very conservative. They're illiquid, so you have to put up with that, and you have those early withdrawal penalties. Certificates of deposit have fixed rates of return just like annuities. They tend to have lower fees because they're less complicated, but they're not tax deferred. They are illiquid, also illiquid. They don't have those guaranteed income features or periodic interest rate adjustments. You could choose a bond. And in this case, we'd be talking about municipal bonds or treasury bonds because corporate bonds are a whole different risk bucket. Bonds have a guaranteed income stream if they're held to maturity. They have higher yields generally, and they have greater liquidity because you can buy and sell them in the market. But if you sell them in the market, then you have market risk. You no longer have that guarantee. The income stream period is limited to the length of the bond. There's always some small credit and default risk, and they may not be tax advantaged, or they may only be tax advantaged in a particular way, like federal tax advantage versus municipal tax advantage. Finally, there are fixed income mutual funds, which are mutual funds that invest in other fixed income products. They also can have higher yields. They're very liquid, but they have principal risk and market risk and no guaranteed income options. So that's sort of the lay of the land when we're talking about fixed annuities. So this is just a chart of a potential hypothetical growth period for a fixed annuity. We took a $100,000 investment in year 0 and carried it out 20 years and reset the interest rate every 5 years, growing from 1% at the beginning to 3% in the last 5 years. You can see how you would have a steady growth and get to about $148,000 in change over time. So it just sort of gives you an idea of how it might grow in a very simple, basic fixed annuity. So what happens when the accumulation period gets interrupted? And this is when we start thinking about triggering that non-forfeiture rate. So if the contract holder stops making contributions during accumulation and never triggers the income, and instead asks to get out of the annuity, the insurer has to give the contract holder some benefit value. The value is usually based on the present value of the annuity minus any applicable charges. And the present value would include the interest that's been earned based on the credited rate and as defined under the contract. So that's what the contract would give you. For individual fixed and fixed index deferred annuities, the value can't be less than that statutory minimum non-forfeiture rate that's set in Section 3750. So that's our standard. It sets the minimum. Annuity owners have some other options at times. They could, for example, get a paid up annuity at a lesser value. They could receive a death benefit if the contract owner died prior to finishing the accumulation period. But generally, we're talking about a cash surrender value if somebody wants to get out. So that brings us to the non-forfeiture value calculation, which is a little convoluted. But the important thing to think about when you're looking at that is this interest rate is not actually fixed at a minimum. There's a calculation here to decide what the interest rate is going to be. And it's based on the 5-year constant maturity treasury rate that's set by the Federal Reserve. So what happens is the valuation looks at that rate, reduces it by some percentage, 125 basis points for costs and so forth that are incurred by the insurance company, and calculates what that interest rate is. If it's really low, it can't go below what is currently a 1% rate and what we're contemplating changing to that 0.15% rate. But if the interest rate market is higher than that, then that minimum won't be triggered. It would be a calculated rate based on that constant maturity rate. So just a little history about how we got to this non-forfeiture rate. The National Association of Insurance Commissioners adopted the model non-forfeiture law in 1981. At the time it was adopted, it was a flat rate at 3%. Now in the 80s, the interest rate markets were way higher. I think we were in the double-digit interest rate market at that point, and a flat rate of 3% seemed really low. So the NAIC adopted that, Vermont adopted it the same year. Some 20 years later, we discovered that the interest rate markets can go way down, and there was some concerns started to bubble up about how close that 3% was to the actual interest rate market. So a temporary rate was set at 1.5%, while the NAIC discussed what to do in these situations. In 2003, the current variable calculation was created. So that calculation using the constant maturity treasury rate, and you wound up with the 1% floor and a 3% max at that point, based on that calculation. And that was adopted by Vermont in 2003 as well. Then we have almost 20 years later, the unprecedented low market rates that we had, going into the pandemic years and so forth. And the NAIC once again looked at the rate and lowered the floor to 0.15%. The industry wanted to go to 0. Somehow, after conversations, the NAIC wound up at 0.15%. And at this point, 21 states have enacted the amendment. 3 states are awaiting governor approval, and 8 states currently have pending legislation like we do.
So these adjustments have been based on what the interest rates in the market are. They were much higher when interest rates were much higher. I remember mortgages at 15%, I think, in that area. In the 70s, we thought we were lucky at 7.5%. And 2 or 3 years ago, they were down getting close to 1%. So the interest rates in the market do fluctuate. And that's what this adjustment is based on, right?
Yes. So this chart actually,
market rates.
This chart is actually a chart showing the history of that constant maturity rate since the 2000s. So this blue line is the actual constant maturity rate over time. The yellow line shows that rate taking into account some of the calculation that's in the non-forfeiture calculation, so minus that 125 basis points. This green dotted line here is the 1% rate that we currently have. So you can see at a number of times and for an extended period of time, that calculation was actually below the 1% minimum for extended periods of time. It went up above for a little while, and then it dropped back down again. The red line is the proposed minimum. It won't always solve the problem of that bottom out that the calculation comes to, but it does sort of minimize how often we want the calculation winds up below the minimum and the minimum gets triggered.
Okay, Senator Hardy has a question.
Mary, why wouldn't, this came up the other day when we were talking about this, why wouldn't we just peg it to something so that it would fluctuate with the rate rather than having it set in statute that then we have to make a law to change? Like,
so we have, I mean, it is pegged to that constant maturity rate. I think it's because nobody was comfortable setting it to 0.
we could have it as a percentage of, or, you know, a certain, you know, amount below or something like that. Rather, I don't know exactly what the language would be, but rather than having to have this conversation every time the interest rates change, like how comfortable are we, you know, where is the right amount below the average constant maturity rate should we be?
I think the problem with that, one problem with that is that you can see from the chart, if you did that, there would be points in time where the consumer would get nothing. Because you would be below, even at a 1.15% and tracking the treasury rates, there would be points in time where you would wind up at 0 for the consumer.
Well, you set a floor.
That's what this does. This pegs to the constant maturity rate and sets a floor at 0.15%.
So can it go above the 0.15% even though this is in statute?
Yes, definitely.
Oh, that's what I was.
Vermont, when it comes to insurance law, there's been a year-long effort to have predictability between states. There have been threats by the federal government to take over managing insurance. And so these are not our rates or these are the national, NIC insurance, it's the National Insurance Commissioners Organization, and they basically send out recommended, model laws or model regulations.
Mm-hmm.
And states generally comply because they've been in arguing out the model law. And it gives some continuity across the country, so your return doesn't depend on if you live in Florida or Vermont. It's generally, I'm sure there'll be a few outliers, but it looks like this one is well on its way to being widely adopted. So it's,
and it also presents some forum shopping on the part of consumers.
Yeah. Okay. So committee, any questions?
I think Senator Pearson has a question.
Yeah, Madam Chair.
I can't see. There you are. I
Thank
was
you.
seeing Mary instead of you, so.
I guess I just, maybe I've obviously missed something, but if we have a floor in statute, what kind of a floor is it if the rate goes below the floor? I mean, I guess I'm missing something. Or is this chart sort of a national average?
So the rate would never go below the floor. So right now, the rate can't go below this green line. If we change the floor, the rate would not be able to go below the red line. This is just to sort of show you where that constant maturity rate was and what would happen if we use the actual calculation without the minimum.
Okay, so in the cases where it dips below the minimum, wouldn't we say Vermont's law has protected our consumers?
We would, but there's a trade-off to that, because remember that there's an insurance company on the other side that has to try to deliver on the promise to that consumer while they can't invest at a rate that's going to help them do that. So you're pushing the insurance company to try to invest in a market that doesn't produce that rate, but they still have to pay it to the customer. So there's that trade-off, that balance. You're trying to make sure that you're protecting the market and the consumer at the same time.
And why, what limits what they can invest in, the insurance company?
Well, their risk is limited. There's all kinds of regulations around how much capital they have to maintain, how much risk they can maintain. Rating agencies take into account their portfolio risk as they rate them, which means that's going to lower their ratings in the marketplace. They have to worry about solvency and liquidity requirements. So they can take a certain amount of risk, but they have to balance that risk against their performance. And they have choices. They can take more investment risk and sort of pull other levers, or they can pull product off the market if they're not comfortable taking that risk. And so it all sort of, unfortunately, all the pieces sort of fit together. And it's a bit of a balancing act between the marketplace and the consumer that you're trying to thread that needle.
But there's not a competent money manager around that's been earning 1% the last 20 years, is there? I mean, why is this so much lower than market averages?
So because they have that protection requirement. So there's all kinds of other regulations that govern what they can invest in, how much risk they can take, how much capital they have to preserve on the side, how much liquidity they have to have. So I get what you're saying, but it all sort of factors in. There's a whole other bucket of regulations that govern how they can play with consumers' money, basically.
Mary, to me, who has several of these, the advantage, because I was older when I was able to start putting some money aside, was the security.
Mm-hmm.
I guaranteed so much a year for the rest of my life.
Right.
And so if I live like my grandmother and great grandmother to be a few days short of 100, they have to have enough money to pay me.
Right.
And I'm guaranteed significantly more interest than the 1%. So no matter what the market's doing, I'm guaranteed an interest rate. If the market does better, I get the market rate. That all goes into the principal, and then I am guaranteed a payout even when my principal is gone. So it's an insurance product, not a securities or investment product. There's a security there.
And
a lot of money, you throw it in the market.
Right. And that insurance company sort of has to be prepared to meet that promise, right?
Right.
I know, back in the early 2000s, there were some really, really juicy annuity products on the marketplace. And when the correction happened in 2007, 2008, there was a bit of concern around some of the insurance carriers because they had these very juicy income benefits out there and the market tanked. So, they're trying to balance, they're trying to anticipate what's going to happen 20 years in the future and how they're going to pay 20 years in the future, not really knowing what's going to happen in the market. And so, like I said, there's this push-pull between the consumer and the insurance company and sort of finding that balance point.
And this has nothing to do with if I pay in and get to the, pay in through the accumulation period, and everything is based on so much coming in and so much being invested. But 5 years into the accumulation period, I win the lottery and decide I don't need this money sitting there anymore. I want to stop paying in and I want my money back out. This is the calculation of the interest rate they would have to pay me on the principal that's sitting in there.
This is the calculation of the minimum that they would have to pay.
The minimum, all right, the minimum they would.
Right, if that credited rate that they promised you is higher than this, you're going to get that.
I'm going to get that, okay.
This is the minimum.
This is the minimum.
This is sort of the worst case scenario payout.
it's not in my contract and I missed it, this is what they're gonna have to pay me.
Right.
Okay. And we don't peg it because there are times when it goes to zero.
Yeah, we peg it, but we're pegging it at a low level.
Right.
And we peg it to that constant maturity rate, but we have a bottom that says, okay, if the constant maturity rate calculation is too low, we're not going to go below right now 1%, and with the proposal below 0.15%.
Okay, so even if the market is below 0.15 in growth, this is
Right.
the
So
it's protection, really. You're not, they can't say, sorry, we're not making any money, so you're not getting any.
Exactly. So if we
Okay.
become Japan and we have negative interest rate markets, we would
Okay.
be at 0.15% here.
Okay. Committee, do we understand this, Senators?
Well, I sort of just have a basic question though.
I'm trying to get you a break and we've now gone past it, so
I would throw a question.
ask your question. We'll just vote this out quickly. No, what is it?
So the question is this, I understand that there's probably some advantages to going with other states in the NIC model, but what is in the consumer's interest to see this floor lowered? Is there any benefit to the consumer in the cases where we go low? Is there any advantage to consumers to getting 1.15 versus 1?
Can I answer that?
Go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, but Mary, you can add on. That's a good question, Senator. And I think one of the key components is what Mary touched on, is the market impact. So the availability of this product in Vermont is based on what insurance companies can provide. Because remember, we're talking, I know we've had discussions about what a money manager can return. We're talking about a fixed deferred annuity. So you don't pay tax on it, but you're guaranteed a fixed, you have a crediting rate, a fixed crediting rate. Because of that, it has to be tied to a very conservative measure, and that is the 5-year maturity rate. The floor is really only comes into play when we have these extended periods of low interest rates. The problem is the existing floor, as you see between the green and the yellow lines, it has been significantly higher than reality. So the availability of the product over time is going to be compromised if we don't have some flexibility there, because again, we want more companies offering this product in the market, and that creates competition. That creates competition in terms of the crediting rate they can provide and all those other benefits. Remember this, there's so many other benefits to the annuity. I don't think, and I think Mary did a good job of kind of laying that out during the presentation, that the purpose and the value of the annuity is not to get the standard non-forfeiture rate. It's all the other benefits that she's articulated.
Could a company from out of state sell me an annuity, but they would have to comply with Vermont law with this floor?
This is state-based regulation. So this is a Vermont state law that the companies that operate in Vermont and issue annuities in Vermont would have to comply with. And
So,
I'm attending the NEIC right now, and there's a lot of work that's done, as the chair had mentioned, about the intricacies of all kinds of products and making sure that we have solid model laws in place. Vermont doesn't necessarily have to come along with all the models, but we do feel from our research and what we've shared here in our report and in these slides that this is the appropriate step in adopting the model law.
So are there any Vermont companies that sell these kinds of annuities?
Yeah.
Certainly.
National Life? Who?
Yeah, I mean, yes, I'm yes.
Okay, so Northwestern Mutual is going to stop selling annuities in the state of Vermont if we leave the floor at 1%?
Remember, there's a whole host of annuity products. So the fixed annuity, it has a market that it's intended to serve. And, you know, I think with Vermont, our demographics, the second oldest state in the country, I'm sure folks that are either near retirement or planning into retirement are looking for a variety of ways to effectuate income in retirement. And some of that need may be on a fixed income. They can't afford the risk. So if you minimize the availability of those products, I think there's folks that, you know, would not benefit from that. So the way I look at the consumer protection here, it's not about where the floor is. It's more about the education to consumers as to what these products do and the complexities of these products and why you buy it in the first place. That's the biggest issue. If somebody buys it and cashes it in 3 years, it's not about the floor that they're going to be hurt by. It's all the early termination fees that they would be hurt by. So we do a lot of education. I think this presentation alone is something that we'll replicate for other purposes in terms of consumer outreach and education, and even engagement with the communities, the agent communities that sell these products.
So Kevin, if we just look at the consumer, and this is a very small percentage. I mean, if the consumer is old or people who buy annuities, you sign a contract. You say, I will pay you so much for X number of years, and you will pay me, or, you know, there's an interest rate either tied to the market or fixed. And after this accumulation period, then I can let it keep accumulating, or I can start getting paid out, and I will pay you out so much. For the consumer, that's the value, is that you can get so much in, you get a guaranteed rate or not. This is the small subset who violate the contract. After 3 or 4 years, they say, I want my money back out. It's not, and I think what I'm hearing you saying is, yeah, if I decide I want out and I'm not going to fulfill the contract, that's a small subset of the consumers. That small subset might get a little bit more if we stay at 1% as a floor. But my children who may want to start buying an annuity may find out that because they have to pay out these extras more than they're making, that they either can't get the same interest rate, or the cost, the buy-in is more, or it's what I've heard you say since the first presentation is you got to make this is a business. It has to make money. It has to abide by its contract, but it has to make money, or it'll change the terms of the contract, and you're trying to protect that.
Yeah, and I think to your point, the crediting rate, the accumulation period, that crediting rate, even 10 or 25 basis points over time is much more impactful than this 85 basis point change to the floor.
Yeah, I skipped ahead a little bit in the slides because we do have a slide in here that sort of has a calculation and a comparison to sort of illustrate how this plays out. So this was a $100,000 annuity investment. Okay, so somebody put $100,000 in initially. We made some assumptions. So we have a credited rate of 0.75%. So that's a pretty low interest rate. So that's the interest rate that the insurance company has said, we're going to give you 0.75% for X number of years. This blue line tracks the credited rate and the calculation of what the surrender value would be if you use the credited rate calculation that's in the actual annuity contract. Now, the calculations are a little bit different because the credited rate takes into account the surrender charges. So this is somebody who's pulling money out early, so they're subject to a surrender charge. We used a 15% surrender charge, which is actually really high in the marketplace, but it illustrates better here. So you would be starting at a base of $85,000 to calculate that surrender value if you use the credited rate. The gray line is the current 1% rate, and the orange line is the 0.15% rate. The minimum calculates based on 87.5%, so you start at 87,500. If you look at the chart, by the end of 2 years, 24 months into the contract, the credited interest rate at a low rate of 0.75% is already returning more than the minimum is going to get you. So you're really talking about customers who are pulling out very early in the contract. And the difference between, say in year one, the 1% and the 0.15% is about $750 on $100,000. So that's the difference if you lower the rate. And by year two, you're doing the calculation based on the credited rate that's in the contract, and the minimum's not even in play anymore.
But is it only for people who end their contracts early?
Yes. So,
Okay.
and I'll go back to this slide.
Why, when they end their contract early, are we talking about interest rate? Doesn't the annuity at that point just pay you out and be done with you? Why is this going on for years where an interest rate applies? Aren't they entitled to their money immediately?
Yes, they are. That just illustrates what would happen depending on which year you decided to get out.
Yeah, you only get paid once. It's the interest rate they have to pay you.
Oh, so they're looking back.
Yes.
They're looking back
Yeah.
to see. I would probably beat this to death, but is there any, probably not in Vermont, is there any specific number as to how much this will cost Vermont annuitants, whatever the term is? Or is there a national number? If you change this from 1 to 0.15, how much more the insurance companies will preserve? And then we could divide that by 500 and see if we're talking about $10,000 for Vermonters, or we're talking about $10 million for Vermonters. What's the variable here in terms of how much Vermonters are potentially going to get a reduction in their payment?
So in all honesty, no. We actually tried to see if we could get that number. But because there's no numbers in the annuity marketplace that sort of are out there, because annuity contracts are constantly being bought and sold and surrendered and income, transferred to income and so forth, we were unable to find a number that would tell us exactly how many people surrender early, for example, and what would that number be. Just as a reminder, though, remember that this only applies to new contracts. So anybody who currently owns an annuity, like me, my contract is going to have the 1% minimum in it. It only applies to anybody who buys a contract after the date that the statute goes into effect. And then it only applies to those surrenders that happen in the early years. And as you saw from that chart, it's the very early years. So if somebody buys an annuity that they supposedly are going to hold for 7 years, but decide they need to get out in year one, it's going to impact them potentially. And then remember that rate is variable. So as the constant maturity rate goes up and we're doing that variable calculation, after a certain point, it's irrelevant because the constant maturity rate calculation is going to come out higher than the minimum ever would. So today in our what appears to be rising marketplace, odds are this minimum is going to be irrelevant if it isn't already. It would only be if we sunk back to those interest rates from 2020, where we were, way down in the 0.25 interest rate range or the 0.4% interest rate range, where this would crop up again. So this is, at this point, probably a moot point for a while.
Okay, I'm going to take one more question. I really want to get you a 5-minute break, and I'm going to put the possible vote and discussion on this at the end of the day if Maria can be with us. And if not, I'd like to get this one out. We can do it tomorrow. Senator Hardy.
No, she answered my question.
She did, okay. All right, committee, I think it's okay if we take a 5-minute break.
Senator Pearson has a question again.
Well,
Okay,
I
I think this was helpful.
I think Chris has a question.
well,
I can't.
I'm sorry,
see
Madam
Chris.
Chair,
I
but
have my picture up here.
so Mary, you referenced the regulations that these products come under in terms of what they themselves have to guarantee, and this interest rate is only a tiny part of it. I assume those are federal in many of them, just like there are practices for pension funds and all sorts of limits on, you know, what you can invest there. Are those, first of all, are those federal, many of those?
Those are state law. Insurance is governed at the state level.
Okay. And as the oversight dictate, in fact, what they can do for investing the money, or what they have to be able to, you know, a minimum standard for holding the pool? In other words, are they, do the oversight regs actually dictate what they do with the money, or just what they have to be prepared to protect, if that makes sense?
So I don't think, and you're getting into financial calculations that I'm a little sketchier on, but I don't think they literally say you can't buy X or you can buy Y. However, they do dictate things like how much capital you have to maintain on hand, what the pool has to be to support these interest rates. There are, you know, liquidity percentages. So how much liquid assets do you have to have, which steers, right, the kinds of investments that you can use, because if you have to meet a liquidity standard, you can't buy a, you know, 40-year bond that you can't get out of easily. So there's solvency and liquidity requirements in the financials that sort of steer where those things go. And then there's also the marketplace, because the rating agencies look at the risk in an investor's portfolio as they rate an insurance company. So if they feel like there's a lot of market risk, they're going to yank down ratings. And ratings obviously are important for insurance companies because they represent safety. So there's a lot of balance there and a lot of moving parts. But I don't think there's literally a statute that says you can't buy X.
Great, thank you. That is helpful to my understanding. Appreciate it.
Okay. 5 minutes, be back here at 20 of. Maria, can you be with us at the end of the day today, or we'll reschedule?
What's end of the day? I need to leave the.
We're doing sugar sweetened beverages at 4. So maybe 4:30?
Sure.
Can you do that?
Are you trying to vote this one out?
I would like to vote this one out. It's all housekeeping. The only thing there was a question about was this rate and what it was. Everything else is housekeeping.
Maria was working on an amendment for me.
Oh, Maria, do you have an amendment for Senator Hardy?
I'm working on that right now, so I need to run it by her. There were also some technical amendments, which you actually are not essential, so which are already done. I can just share with you, but it's really, how quickly would you like things to move?
Well, if we can't move it and there is an amendment coming, which I didn't know about, or I wouldn't have scheduled it, we'll just have to push it off till next week.
It's related to the utility insurance issue, and do you remember this
is a housekeeping bill, so if
it's a housekeeping amendment. It's really pretty minor, and Maria and I have been just trying to get enough information.
Can you make sure that goes over to Kevin Gaffney so he has a chance to look at it and tell us that it's really minor?
I haven't seen it yet.
Okay, but I mean,
Yes.
just make sure that DFR gets a copy of it so that when it comes up next week, they're prepared to.
Yep, Maria's been
comment.
working with DFR
Okay.
on it.
Okay, then that would work. Okay, then Maria, we are gonna need you at 4:30. Kevin?
Madam Chair, do you need Mary Block for any more of the discussion?
No, thank you, Mary. I think that was really helpful. I now understand what I own.
Great.
Glad I could help.
Thank you, Mary.
All right, thanks.
Hope they're around for my children because I didn't crash when the market did.
Not crashing?
No, no, it didn't crash today, Michael. When it crashed last time
Oh.
and everybody was watching the TV sweating, yeah, I didn't crash.